Welcome back. In today's programme, we are focusing on the conflict in Yemen. In a moment, we'll hear from a former government minister about whether calls for a ceasefire can work. But first, here are some of the other stories today to keep an eye on. Negotiations have resumed for the release of schoolgirls kidnapped by Boko Haram from the Nigerian town of Chibok. 21 girls were released last week and were reunited with their parents yesterday. The group kidnapped 276 girls in April 2014 from a boarding school in the town. Brazil and India have agreed to strengthen and expand investment cooperation and forge a long commercial partnership after bilateral talks between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Michel Temer in Goa. And China has launched its longest manned space mission, sending 2 astronauts into orbit to spend a month aboard a space laboratory. The mission is part of a broader plan to have a permanent manned space station in service for 2022. Returning now to the war in Yemen, I spoke to Rafat al-Akali, a former Yemeni government minister who left his country in the lead up to the war. He's currently teaching at Oxford University. Mr. Akali is one of the many younger, educated Yemenis who have been forced out. Many, like him, feared for the safety of themselves and their families. He says he's unwilling to return without a comprehensive peace agreement. As we look at Yemen today, do we look to any one side in this conflict to blame for the conflict and the level of killing?
I think it's hard to blame one side for where we are today and the level of suffering and conflict that we have today. It's easy to trace back, and it depends on which side you talk to pinpoint and say this is where it started and this was the side that started it. But I mean, I think what really matters is where we are today. And today, the suffering is across the country, north to south, east to west, and it's currently caused by all the belligerents on all sides.
You tried reunification. You tried a plan to let's split the country again. Let's have 6 territories and live as some kind of federal being.
Yeah.
That didn't get very far. Why did that fail?
I think that's in a lot of the minds of the people that were there from 2011, 2014, especially a lot of the youth activists that were out. That was one way to ensure that we skip from the grip of the strong centralized power elite that were all in one part of the country and ruling the whole part. So it seemed like a good plan, devolve some powers, let people decide what they want closer to where they live. Unfortunately, that never saw the light of day, as you mentioned, mostly because those powers to be refused to let it go through. It was something that a lot of people anticipated, that this is not going to be an easy struggle to kind of shift the balance of power so radically from being concentrated in a very small elite in Sana'a, in the capital, to spreading it across the country.
It was a theoretical fix, wasn't it? It didn't have any support?
It did have some international support. What the key thing that was missed, in my opinion, was that it didn't take into account how the power elites were going to deal with it. There was this assumption that since we had a national dialogue conference and everyone was there, everyone kind of agreed that this is where we should head to. But then that's where everything fell apart after the agreement.
Do you think in some ways this is like an echo of Iraq, where Sunni and Shia simply cannot get along anymore?
I think it's very different, at least from my perspective, than the situation in Iraq. The sectarian differences in Yemen were never highlighted as much as they are today. The Zaydis in Yemen, which it's a part of the Shia sect, but it's the closest part to Sunni. So we never had an issue. We could never differentiate per se between the two, and so I wouldn't say that it would be as it is right now in Iraq. And I think it's still not too late to go back and try to figure out a solution that would get everyone back on track.
But even internal fix in Yemen was possible. Even let's go along that theoretical track.
Yeah.
You've now got AQ
Yeah.
stirring things up. You've got Daesh stirring things up.
Yeah.
Who are killing for what purpose? Who do they support?
I don't think we can ever figure out who Daesh or Al-Qaeda is supporting, but
They
clearly
just
they
support
have their
mayhem.
own. Yeah,
They just like death.
Exactly, and they have their own agendas.
Is there a political agenda? Do they care about the future of Yemen?
Well, it depends. I think there's a slight difference between Al-Qaeda and Daesh so far in Yemen, at least. Al-Qaeda has been following this model where they control an area and they actually go out and provide services to people. They dig water wells, they provide food, and kind of try to show a model where they can rule and deliver better than government. So that has been Al-Qaeda's approach, at least in many areas that they controlled. Daesh so far is not still on the radar in Yemen. They've done a few operations here and there, claimed responsibility for a few of the bombings, but they haven't clearly set out an agenda of what they want to do in Yemen. So it's not clear yet what they're doing.
John Kerry tries to play a fairly straight bat here, if I can use a cricketing analogy, and say that he's actually to try and fix it for everyone.
Yeah.
But he's not really, is he? Because the Americans are giving the Saudis an awful lot of weaponry. They're giving them an awful lot of money.
Yeah.
And we know what the Saudis are doing with it.
Yeah, and I think there's no way around that the US and the UK and most of the major international powers are part of this war, regardless of whether they want to admit or not. The US and the UK providing logistical support, refueling, selling arms, and even providing targeting, as they themselves stated before. So they are part of this on the side of the coalition trying to restore the legitimate government in Yemen. And so whether they like it or not, they're part of it. So they're trying, I think, at this point to find a solution, to find a way out that would minimize their losses and their allies' losses.
And even if a fix were found, the sort of bright people you need to run a country, people like yourself, are no longer there. Right? I mean, you found a life for yourself in Oxford, you're an academic. Why not? I don't criticize you for that, but I mean, a country like Yemen trying to rebuild itself will need bright people like you to go and run the place, won't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a challenge that we've had even before this war. We always suffered with a low capacity within government to implement, to deliver on promises to people. And so right now, as you mentioned, there's this huge brain drain out of the country. So everyone that was able to leave have left. So it will be one of the major challenges once this conflict comes to an end, is how do we kickstart recovery, reconstruction, rebuild everything if we're not able to bring back the people. So for me personally, I'm planning to go back. But
you would like to go back?
I would like to go back. I'm just
What
waiting.
has to happen before you would feel able to go back?
A peace agreement that brings everyone back together. We know it's not going to be perfect. We know it's not going to resolve the issues on the ground. It's going to be a very shaky situation. We're going to be back to a much messier situation than where we were in 2011, for example. But it's at least, you know, a sense of this is a time for rebuilding, reconstruction. Right now, there's very little you could do on the ground because guns are speaking, and when guns speak, everyone else.
No, I was just going to ask you though. So, I mean, even if you can get over the bloodshed, which would probably take a generation or more, how would you see Yemen thriving in the world? Because its natural resources are not that great.
Yeah, I think, again, it's going to be back to a very challenging situation once this stops. It's definitely not going to be the same Yemen that we had before. We cannot imagine that we'd go into the same kind of administrative system, the same centralized government in Sana'a that is able to control any of the territory. So it's definitely going to be a completely new reality that we have to deal with. Hopefully, at least some regions of Yemen will be able to make it out of the conflict and start a journey towards prosperity at least. But I think, as you mentioned, Yemen has always had the challenges of lack of natural resources. But on the other side, there was a lot of opportunities as well that were always missed by previous governments.
What do you think was missed?
So, for example, we always said that Yemen has a very strategic position in terms of the shipping line, and we've got the Aden and the port of Aden, and we have really in the Arabian Peninsula one of the most fertile as well lands, although now that is challenged by the lack of water. So we've got, you know, the coasts, we've got the fisheries trees, we've got the strategic location, we've got the population, which is young, wanting to work, very entrepreneurial. But it takes a really capable government to be able to take that, deal with the challenges and deliver something.
And how depressing, as you were part of a government only, in recent history, to actually see that road to progress,
right,
where people's level of education, life expectancy, prosperity goes up.
Yeah.
That graph is reversed now. It's heading downwards, isn't it?
Absolutely. That was, I think, one of the most depressing times, because especially after 2011, again, there was so much hope, optimism that things were going to change. Everyone that were out in the streets saw that at least now they have a say in what's happening. And so 2011, 2014, there was this curve going up and a feeling that, yes, situation is bad, but maybe we're going somewhere. And now all that has been crushed by what's going on. It's been very difficult.
If it's possible to ask about the average Yemeni, if there is such a person, do they blame the internal struggle between the various faiths, between the various factions, or do they blame the outside players, the Americans, the Saudis, the Iranians?
I think there's a lot of blame going around, both for the internal players and for the international regional backers, both Iran, Saudi, the US, all around. So every side have their own backers, kind of, and people that internationally are sympathetic with their cause. So if you ask the average Yemeni, I don't think there's an average Yemeni anymore. This war has actually really split society, torn the social fabric to a great extent, and mostly along these kind of political things as well, of where they think who is right, who is wrong. And so very difficult, depending on who you ask. So if you ask in the south, for example, in Aden, they'd say the Houthis and Saleh are the problem. The coalition was helping us. If you ask in the north, they'd say the coalition is the problem. Saudi Arabia, Emirates, they're the ones bombing us, and they're the ones to blame. So,
is it that there's a comparison with Syria here, in that citizens just want the bombing, the death to stop?
Absolutely. That's what the average citizen cares about, really. They're not caring about who's going to get to power or what's going to happen. They just need to be able to feed their families and feed themselves, find a decent job, the very simple human rights that everyone aspires for.
Thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Well, we end our programme with Insight Bite. This is a little something that we feel you should know. And today, we remember Jia Jia, the world's oldest giant panda living in captivity. Jia Jia was euthanized in Hong Kong at the age of 38, following a rapid deterioration of her health in the past 2 weeks. The average lifespan for a panda in the wild is 18 to 20 years of age. And that's all for now. I'm Martin Stanford. That was Insight.